Welcome to the debate. Today, we're delving into the really intriguing origins of ambient music. We'll be exploring the profound, yet I think sometimes contested, relationship between two key figures, Erik Satie and Brian Eno. Now, these artists, separated by half a century, they both envisioned music as this immersive, environmental presence, really challenging traditional ideas about performance and listening. So our central question today is this: does Brian Eno's ambient music represent a direct, perhaps refined lineage of Erik Satie's musique d'ameublement? Or does it actually constitute a distinct, technologically driven paradigm shift, one that maybe just draws inspiration from Satie's earlier, more conceptual ideas? I'll be arguing for that clear conceptual and aesthetic continuity, seeing Eno's work as essentially an evolved form of Satie's original vision.
And I'll be taking the other side. I'll contend that while Satie definitely laid some important groundwork, Eno's approach, well, it's so deeply rooted in recording technology and systematic composition that it really created a fundamentally new paradigm. It's a distinction, I think, that goes way beyond just mere inspiration.
Okay, so my position, essentially, is that Brian Eno's ambient music is a direct continuation of Satie's musique d'ameublement, albeit, yes, expanded and technologically refined. I mean, Eno himself recognized and built upon Satie's quite radical philosophical ideas about music's role in the environment. Satie's concept from 1920, furniture music, it was explicitly about creating sound that would be, and I quote, part of the noises of the environment, designed to soften the noises of the knives and forks at dinner, not dominating them, not imposing itself, and even, interestingly, to neutralize the street noises. His famous instruction, for the audience to behave as if the music did not exist, that was revolutionary. A call for a new way of listening, or maybe non-listening, right? And a real reevaluation of what music is for. Satie, even calling himself a non-musician, really highlighted this departure, showing the concept and function were key for him more than traditional musical craft. Eno picked up on this, stating that music addressing the social sonic environment, listeners included, has strong ties to Erik Satie, who also identified as a non-musician. Eno's stated goal for Ambient 1, music for airports, finding new places to put music, new kinds of niches where music could belong. Well, that directly echoes Satie's aim to respond to a need. Eno defining ambience as an atmosphere or a surrounding influence, a tent, and aiming to produce original pieces ostensibly for particular times and situations. It just aligns perfectly with Satie's environmental concept. Music for airports lacking, big dynamic shifts and avoiding obvious melodies facilitates that background listening. For me, it proves Eno's work is a successful, modernized fulfillment of Satie's initial vision.
I see the line you're drawing, but I come at this quite differently. While Satie's musique d'ameublement was certainly, a provocative conceptual starting point, Brian Eno's ambient music, for me, fundamentally represents a paradigm shift. And this is largely driven by, technology and a much more systematic way of composing. Satie's furniture music, remember, it was conceived as a live performance piece. You had instruments distributed around the theater. It was an avant-garde artistic intervention within a physical space happening in real time. Eno, on the other hand, he completely leveraged the growing power of the recording studio. He famously called it his compositional tool, didn't he? His work, think about No Pussyfooting with Robert Fripp, was built around these interactions between Eno's tape loop pieces and Fripp's work on electric guitar. That demonstrates a reliance on electronic manipulation, tape loops, processing, stuff that was just impossible in Satie's time. And then there's Eno's generative music, this idea that music can kind of create itself based on rules. Look at the Screet music from '75, or later things like 77 Million Paintings. He used overlapping signals, varying rates of decay, these probabilistic or heuristic rule sets, basically algorithms, right, to ensure the music would not repeat during any normal listening period. That's a highly sophisticated, almost self-generating approach to composition. It's worlds away from Satie's conceptual prompts. Plus, Eno's application became highly specific, highly functional. Music for airports wasn't just environmental. It was designed specifically to induce serenity for apprehensive air travelers while consciously working with airport sounds like announcements, deliberately contrasting with, say, the irritating quality of music. That goes beyond Satie's more general concept into a targeted, psychological, functional intervention. And that intervention was only possible because of the technology and this whole new compositional mindset. That, for me, makes Eno's contribution a genuinely distinct new paradigm. Let's dig into that technology point first, because I think it's crucial. It's clear, isn't it, that the very nature of ambient shifted with technology. Satie's concept, as I said, was inherently about live acoustic sound interacting with a physical, social space. The problem he was trying to solve was the audience's ingrained habit of listening attentively to music in a performance setting. He wanted them to ignore it. Eno, though, he came of age with advanced recording with electronic synthesis. His systems music, his generative music, like in discrete music, you even see that beer-like diagram showing the recording process, inspired by cybernetics. That stuff simply couldn't exist without multi-track recorders, synthesizers, tape loops. This deep technological embeddedness, it fundamentally alters what ambient even means. It moves it from, a conceptual instruction for a live event to a manufactured, replicable, distributable sonic product. The experience itself becomes different, doesn't it?
Yeah, okay, I understand the focus on the tools, the technology, but I'm not convinced it fundamentally alters the core idea. While the technology obviously provided new means, let's say, the essence of Satie's vision, this idea of music as an unobtrusive environmental presence, I think that remains central for Eno. His use of technology, I'd argue, just allowed for a more consistent, a more widely distributable realization of that original vision. It fulfilled its potential, maybe. I mean, look at Eno's quiet clubs. These were actual installations, right? They had ziggurat light sculptures, materials like vermiculite, tree trunks, creating these sort of quasi-domestic environments. Weren't these just modern extensions of Satie's idea? Music integrated into a design space, but now enhanced, controlled by electronics managing light and sound. The goal, it seems to me, was still that background presence, the furniture, the tint, the atmosphere, not the main event. Technology was serving the core concept, making it maybe more effective, more pervasive. It feels like evolution to me, not a totally separate thing. But does the how really negate the shared why? I mean, the fundamental shared intent, it seems to me, is redefining the listener's role, moving away from that active, focused attention we usually give music. Satie's instruction to behave as if the music did not exist, that was a deliberate poke in the eye to traditional listening, wasn't it? He was essentially asking, can music just be here, like the air, without demanding our constant focus? And Eno's design for music for airports, where he literally said, it doesn't matter if you miss a bit, and highlighted its suitability for background listening while you're, cleaning up, chatting, or writing. That echoes Satie precisely, I think. Both artists wanted to liberate music from that demand for scrutiny, letting it exist as this pervasive yet non-demanding presence. The source material even calls this shared quality a kind of romanticism. So isn't Eno's success in actually getting people to treat music this way, isn't that in a sense the ultimate fulfillment of Satie's quite challenging initial goal?
That's a compelling point about the shared intent, yeah. But have you considered the different motivations behind that non-engagement? Satie's first attempt, remember, it famously failed because the audience did listen attentively. It highlighted that his piece was really an avant-garde challenge, almost a piece of conceptual art, making a point about listening habits in social settings. Eno's intent for music for airports, though, feels far more functional, far more pragmatic. It was designed specifically to induce serenity for anxious flyers in a very particular public space. And it was designed to be robust enough to actually withstand interruptions, like those inevitable airport announcements. That's deliberate design work aimed at managing specific emotional states and fitting into an existing, noisy sonic reality. It's not just a conceptual dare like Satie's. Eno's work creates this multivariable, dynamic process that envelops us. While it might be passive listening, it's a pervasive, intentional immersion designed for a psychological effect. That feels like a different level of intervention compared to Satie's more, let's say, philosophical gesture. There's a nuance there I find quite distinct. And I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it's merely a refinement. Let me tell you why I think the gap is bigger. Eno's whole conceptual framework, it drew heavily on movements and thinkers from the mid-20th century, people who came after Satie. His fascination with systems and generative music, that didn't come out of nowhere. It was inspired by cybernetic thinkers like Stafford Beer, the guy exploring self-regulating systems, and Roy Ascott, plus minimalist composers like John Cage, LaMotta Young, Steve Reich. Eno himself explicitly said, performing LaMotta Young's integer piece, that very structured minimalist work with sustained tones, was, quote, the first piece of music I ever performed from a score, and the first piece that I felt really convinced that I had made music. That's significant. His whole Cajun attitude, even applying rules for people painting a canvas, it points to a much broader, much more technologically informed avant-garde lineage that's just distinct from Satie's early 20th century kind of solo provocation. Satie couldn't have engaged with those ideas. They simply didn't exist yet.
Okay. I see why you think those later influences create a complete break. But let me offer a slightly different perspective on that. Well, Eno certainly engaged with those later ideas, cybernetics, minimalism, Cage. Absolutely. Couldn't they also be seen as, further elaborating, providing the methods, perhaps, for the conceptual space Satie originally opened up? John Cage's interest in the organization of sound, pushing boundaries on what even counts as music, doesn't that align directly with Satie's challenge to traditional musical structures? The idea that any sound could be musical. And similarly, the minimalist composers exploring, how variety can be generated by very, very simple systems. Didn't that provide Eno with concrete techniques to actually achieve those immersive, slowly evolving soundscapes that Satie aspired to? Music that acts like an environment, not a story? Eno's genius, maybe, wasn't in creating a totally new concept from scratch, but in synthesizing these diverse influences, the systems thinking, the minimalist tools, to finally fulfill the latent potential he saw in Satie's initial groundbreaking idea. He transformed it, yes, from a sort of niche provocation into a widely recognized genre. For me, that speaks to the enduring power of Satie's original conceptual seed, that it could inspire such development later on. So, to wrap up my side, I still maintain that Brian Eno's ambient music represents a direct, continuous evolution, and yes, a refinement of Erik Satie's musique d'ameublement. The core intent, I believe, remains the fundamental shared principle, creating music that functions as an integral yet unobtrusive part of an environment, and in doing so, redefining the listener's whole relationship to sound. Simply leveraged new technologies, new ideas, to fill Satie's pioneering vision on a much broader scale, expanding its reach and its ultimate impact.
And I'll reaffirm my position. While Satie's conceptual foundation was without doubt significant, truly groundbreaking, even Eno's ambient music constitutes a distinct paradigm shift. It was driven by technology, advanced recording, generative techniques, and by specific functional goals, like using sound to induce calm in an airport. Eno took the concept from essentially a provocative live performance idea and transformed it into this pervasive, technologically mediated sonic environment. And in doing so, I believe he created something fundamentally new, something that redefined not just what music could be, but also how it could actively shape and interact with our surroundings.
Ultimately, I suppose both Satie and Eno profoundly challenged how we think about music and how it interacts with our world. Their legacies, whether you see them as a continuous thread or as distinct leaps, definitely compel us to reconsider the role of sound, even supposedly background sound, in our daily lives.
Exactly, and perhaps the debate itself highlights the richness here. It shows how one seemingly simple idea, music is furniture, can lead to such complex and evolving artistic practices, inspiring this kind of thoughtful disagreement even decades later. There's clearly a lot to unpack in how these ideas developed.